Welcome back to the channel. As you know, I have created quite a few videos before Christmas, producing at one time 2 videos a week, but now I've decided to go down to 1 video a week. I'm currently going to focus on creating a long video, about an hour's time, which will be starting next Saturday. And I'll be posting Norwegian time every Saturday at around 12 o'clock, around noon or so. And the goal of this channel is to help you help yourself. In other words, it's self-help. If you do think you need therapy, I would suggest you find someone who you consider to be a very good therapist that can help you. Okay. Now, I'm going back to an old school style of working and presenting. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be writing on a piece of paper a little brief outline of what I want to talk about, at least some of the major points, and I might have more paper. And you might actually see me stop and look down and write a little bit and continue. If that becomes tedious, I might edit it out. I will also edit out the sounds of the tram, because right outside my window here, the tram drives by about every 20 or 30 minutes or so. And what I will do when the tram rides is I'll just basically freeze for a moment, like that, and then I'll just edit it so it will be fairly seamless. I'm going to try to have minimal amount of editing so that you get me live and I get to present things in a dynamic way. Sometimes writing a script ahead of time is very beneficial, especially if you want to weave in things you want to sell and be a little bit salesman-like. However, I want to try to avoid that. I think writing scripts is a lot of fun, and I do enjoy the challenge of speaking from a script. But I also notice that I usually am at my best when I can just talk from my heart and explain things as they go. The first part of the series that I'm going to be presenting now is going to be about the narrative, and we're also going to talk about mindfulness meditation. And those are the 2 main focuses I'm going to have for a few videos now. And I'm also going to include a book review. Now, the book review will come towards the end, and it may or may not be part of the series about the narrative. However, everything within psychology does fit together. And the more you understand about psychology, the better it is. So the book review is going to be on a book that I have read. It's going to be about usually self-help or some sort of psychological literature, which I find, of course, very fascinating. I'm sorry if I nerd out every once in a while, but you'll just have to put up with that. Okay, so today we're not going to be able to do a book review, but I am going to talk a little bit about, as I said in the beginning, I'm going to talk about the narrative, and I'm going to talk about mindfulness meditation or some sort of meditation practice. It really doesn't matter. Okay, so if we're going to get into the narrative, the narrative is actually just the story you're telling yourself about your life. And that story is going to be determining your psychological health to a large degree. Why do I think that? Well, I notice that when people come to me, if they change their narrative, and almost everyone has a narrative of being in a victim role, and they change their narrative from being a victim to be the master of their life, and they master the different challenges that life gives them, then they almost always feel better about what's going on. The narrative can reflect past traumas, although it doesn't necessarily have to do that. It can also reflect current situations or things about the future that the person is worried about or scared of. And these narratives can be insidious. They can be very pushing our self-esteem and our feeling of mastery way down, and they can be very, very destructive. And we're going to explore all the different ways the narrative can change and what has to change in order for you to become a more robust and stronger person. I'm also going to bring in some work from Aaron Antonovsky and other relevant thinkers around the narrative. And we're just going to go in depth a few times around exactly how important your narrative is. So if you really want to make a life change, you really need to look at how you're talking to yourself, how you're telling other people what's happened to you, and then figuring out how you can change that. I'm going to illustrate this with a personal example just so you can see this narrative. I can do the narrative from a victim perspective because I was a victim for a fairly long time, and then I can change it to how I think of it now. See if you can figure out what elements are changing. Okay, so a few years back, actually almost 14 years ago, I was together with a woman for about 6 or 7 years. And to begin with, we had a wonderful relationship. It was really quite intense. But then as things changed, I changed maybe, she changed maybe, I'm not exactly sure what happened, we kind of grew apart. In between time, we had 2 wonderful boys. However, we had talked about this several times, and to begin with, our breakup was quite, what's the word I'm looking for? Amicable. Sorry, I can't figure out what that word is. Can't pronounce it. Amicable, maybe, or it was at least we both agreed upon it, and we seemed to be very friendly with each other when we decided to break up. I had promised to give her 2 years to get back on her feet because I was the person at the time who was actually pulling in most of the money for our living expenses, although she did do her part in terms of running the business. Well, then what happened was she paid some bills without checking that the bill was correct, and we got involved in a huge court case. And in this court case, we broke up, actually. So we had started it to begin with as a couple, and then we broke up. And then she decided that she didn't need to be a part of this anymore. So I had to take over the whole case. And as things turned out, I decided to change the lawyers. She disagreed upon that, but she couldn't really say anything anymore because now it was my ballgame. And then as things progressed, I put in a lot of money trying to win the case, and in the end, I lost. And that really sucked. I lost quite a bit of money, although I managed to get her to pay half of the loss, but she paid nothing for the lawyer that I used, even though she was obligated to. I had supported her in terms of paying for the house so she wouldn't lose the house, which to this day she denies actually ever happened. And everything I had worked up with in terms of money had been basically, she just kept it all. So I was really, really dumb because I agreed to use a lawyer that we both agreed to use to settle this because I thought we were friends and that she would be fair to me. And she wasn't. She basically took all my money, and that really, really has set me back economically. You can tell in that narrative I'm blaming her, putting everything over onto her shoulders. Now, a different type of narrative, and I won't go through the whole thing from beginning to end, is that I will focus more on what it was that happened within me that allowed her to take advantage of me. Okay, so if I rewind it to the point where I'm talking about the court case, I could probably focus more on the fact that when we decided to settle our assets, I used to have this underlying feeling of it's my fault and it's my responsibility to take care of her. So when she managed to talk to the lawyer and convince the lawyer that she should get a huge sum of money in terms of keeping the house and all the assets around the house and not dividing it fairly, I basically went along with it. That's on me, not on her. I should never have said from day one that she can have 2 or 3 years to get back on her feet. I should have said, no, we're dividing the house now, immediately. I should never have agreed to use the same lawyer, and I should never have listened to her with the belief that she was going to be fair to me. And this is on me. It's up to her to figure out why she acted the way she did. It's not up to me to punish her. It's not up to me to try to get revenge. I have to live with the decisions I made at the time. And so I'm doing that. I've moved on. I'm no longer a victim. I am someone who has taken mastery over that part of my life. And I will never, ever again let myself believe that everything that goes wrong in any relationship, especially with a woman I'm romantically involved with, that it's my fault. At the same time, I will make sure that from an economic perspective, everything is very well organized and taken care of in case we should ever break up. So I think you can see the difference in the narrative there. And it gives me much more power to not blame someone. Because when I was stuck in this blaming her, I really never got my act together. I didn't work consistently towards goals. I didn't really have focus, even though I tried. But I think I was so emotionally in turmoil and so upset about the whole thing that I just kind of sabotaged and ruined a lot of other business opportunities that came along. And it's first after several years that I was able to understand this and work through this and finally put this aside. I did go through a period of about 3 or 4 months where I was feeling quite depressed about the whole thing. That's probably quite normal. But once I got through that, I've been very, very focused on restoring my economic situation and getting back to a lifestyle that I really like in terms of making money. I have 4 grown-up children now, so that's good. 2 from a previous marriage and 2 from this last marriage. In Norway, a lot of people don't get married anymore. We basically just live together. So I guess you would say we're married through common law. In order for a narrative to be healthy, is that you have to be able to, one, be able to talk about your whole story in a coherent manner. What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes I'll get people who come in and they'll start their story and they'll say, oh, this is just the most terrible thing that ever happened to me. And they'll look down and they'll just be overwhelmed by emotions and they won't be able to continue going through the whole story. Another way of going through the story is where you're kind of like a computer, where you're just listing off details and you're just bang, 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 bang. There's no emotion underneath the telling of the story. That's another way of having low coherence in a story. High coherence is when you can go through and really feel at least some of the emotions, and especially the emotions from a new perspective. This is so important to understand, and it's something I'm going to come back to again and again, and that is you always can choose your perspective. You can't always choose what's going on around you, but you can decide to choose your perspective. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's take an extreme example of someone like Viktor Frankl, who was stuck in a concentration camp for basically the whole Second World War. And I mean, it's just really hard to imagine how degrading and shameful and painful that must have been, because he was a psychiatrist and suddenly he's just pulled out of his work. He's suddenly placed in a situation which is extremely doubtful if you will survive because you're not given enough food or water. And everyone you know and love has also been jailed, and you're seeing people die around you like flies. And it must have been so traumatic to be in a situation like that. I can't even imagine how hard that would be. And yet, he came through this thriving and being able to write a book and start helping other people who had been through a very difficult time. And I'm paraphrasing here because I'm remembering the story I've heard, so maybe it's a little bit off, but it does illustrate quite well what I want to emphasize. And that is, Viktor Frankl is out working, and it is a super hot day, and he is burning up, he's sweating, and there's just clear blue skies, not enough water, and he's got all the people around him. They're working hard, they're breaking rocks, and the work is basically meaningless, right? And as he's doing this work, he looks up and he notices that far off over there in the distance is a cloud. And he thinks, at least I'm imagining he's thinking that, the Nazis can take everything away from me. But there's one thing they can't take away from me. And that is what I'm focusing on. So I'm going to look forward to when that cloud comes sailing in. And even though it's not going to be a long time, maybe only for a minute or two, I'm just going to enjoy fully and completely the feeling of shade that hits me. I think that's such a powerful narrative, because if he'd focused on, well, the Nazis have probably killed my whole family, he probably would not have survived. But he kept focusing on the little things he had control over. And that is so important for mental health. And it also has a lot to do with being able to feel like you're moving forward in life, that you have momentum. And that is being able to focus on those little things, which really brings you forward in any situation. And that focus is under your conscious control. You can focus on the fact that, well, like I did, that she'd stolen all my money, or I could focus on the fact that I was responsible for saying yes when I should have said no, right? So that means that I have learned something. And it's kind of funny, she is still the exact same person. So I guess there's a sort of like a little bit of revenge there. She hasn't grown from the experience. She is still doing her thing of manipulating and getting people to do things that she wants. Where I have learned, I have managed to move on. So in that sense, I'm much richer, even though it doesn't show in my bank account just yet. So in that way, I guess revenge is sweet. Okay, let's move on from being vengeful back to Viktor Frankl. And the thing that he did, and which his example teaches us so well, is that focus is something you have control over, and what you choose to focus on will bring out and either give you more energy or start dampening your energy. I have to laugh at myself, because I was on the airplane here the other day, and I'm very lucky. My mother's 91, and so I flew over to Seattle to celebrate her birthday in the U.S. I live in Norway, by the way, for those of you who don't know that. And on the way back, I was really upset on the plane for about an hour or maybe 40 minutes, because I had paid for window seats where me and my 17-year-old son, where we could sit next to each other and he could look out the window and I could sit in the aisle. And because I am now 63, I have to be careful about if I drink a lot of water or soda. And what happens is then that I have to get up and go to the bathroom. So it's very convenient for me to sit next to an aisle seat. But can you imagine what happened to us? We were placed between two large men in the middle aisle. So that means there's 4 seats. We're in the middle, and we're stuck there in the middle. Completely the opposite of what I had envisioned where we were going to sit when we got on the plane and what I had paid for ahead of time. And I was really upset about that. And then I heard the lady in the background talking away, and she had a really annoying voice, and everything just seemed really off and wrong. And then I realized, Sigurd, come on. This isn't what you want to do. You can't focus on all this and be a victim of this situation. And, some people say, well, why didn't you ask to move seats? Well, the plane was totally full. So I saw before we boarded that there were maybe like 4 or 5 empty seats. And I really wanted to sit next to my son. So I decided then to change what I was focusing on. So then I focused on the fact that fortunately I have fairly short legs, so I had good leg room. So I could stretch out my legs. I focused on the fact that I could tone down how much tea and water and soda I drank. And so I did that. So I didn't really have to pee that often. And I had been smart and had downloaded ahead of time quite a few videos. And so I just enjoyed watching videos because I never get a chance otherwise to just sit down and watch a film without feeling a little bit guilty about, I should be doing this kind of work or that kind of work. That's something I need to work on, by the way. And it just changed my whole experience. I had a good flight after that. So the first 40 minutes were pretty awful. And that's not because of the seating. That's because of what I was focusing on. So when I changed my focus, I changed my thinking, and then that changed my emotions, and then I had a good flight. So I just have to laugh at myself that I can still get stuck in those negative spirals, and that sometimes it takes almost a whole hour before I figure out what I'm doing. Okay, let's continue now. The narrative has to have 4 different things. I was talking about cohesion. I have to be able to admit, what is my responsibility? What did I do wrong? Or what did I do to contribute to this situation? Now, obviously, if you're a child and you're working through some sort of traumatic experience where your parents have done something or someone has done something to you, it can't be your responsibility that you were stuck in this situation. That's unfortunate that these bad things happen to people, and they do happen to people. And I'm very sad on people's behalf for what they have gone through as children. However, even in a very traumatic situation, you still, as an adult, to shift my attention to those aspects of my environment that I do have control over. You have to understand why this happened to you. Human beings have a hard time dealing with life-threatening or just difficult situations if we don't believe that there is some sort of meaning behind it. And there are basically 2 types of meanings. You have the meaning from an atheist perspective, or you have the meaning from a religious perspective. Now, from a religious perspective, most people will connect with God and feel that somehow God is giving them a difficult task that they have to master and that it's God's will. The atheist perspective is all about focusing on, what have I learned and how is this going to enrich my life? And these 2 perspectives can be woven together. But I just like to make that distinction because a lot of people don't believe in God. They profit far more by just focusing on the learning and the mastery of moving forward. Whereas other people who do believe in God, they profit from both understanding what they've learned and maybe from their religious perspective, what God is trying to teach them. And I don't try to dictate their religious views. I'm not in the position, and I don't have the desire to be their priest. I'm just someone there to do the psychological work. However, I will ask them if they need it to get spiritual counseling, if that's going to be part of the process of moving forward. So again, let's go through the main points. You have cohesion. That means you can tell the story with good feelings of either being sad when you're sad and happy when you have shifted your focus. The other part of the story is responsibility. How did I contribute to making the situation bad? As I said in the first example, I contributed by being too agreeable and by believing it's my fault. In the airplane situation, I was just focusing on all the things that went wrong that I was really upset about. Okay. And then comes control, focusing, what you're focusing on. And sometimes we don't shift our focus in the situation, but we have to shift what we're focusing on in our narrative. So I never talk about how my ex cheated me now. Never again. I might joke about it, but I focus always on my responsibility. And that's because I have learned from that situation, right? And that learning empowers me. That learning gives me the strength to believe that I can move into the future and not make that same mistake again. And also, it lets her off the hook. She has to deal with her own karma, if we're going to use that term. It's up to her to figure out what she needs to change. It's not my role to be her advisor or her, I don't know what you call it, her spiritual counselor or whatever. She has to figure out on her own why her type of behavior just isn't good for other people around her. And then, of course, we have to remember that it's all about understanding the deeper meaning. Why is this happening to me? Now, the interesting thing about the narrative is that if you don't have the underlying neurology to support the new narrative, then it's not going to help to change the narrative. That's why I advocate for mindfulness meditation or some sort of meditation practice. Now, what meditation does to the brain is extremely fascinating. Most of the meditation forms that are practiced have to do with being present in the moment and just accepting whatever comes to mind, and in a non-judgmental way. Okay? That's so important to understand. And I have my own technique for making mindfulness really easy to learn. So if you're someone who's tried to learn mindfulness in the past and hasn't succeeded, well, you're welcome, because I'm going to teach that as well. And I might even have some previous videos on that. I'm going to re-record it and make new videos and probably make a sound file or maybe a PDF that you can download to accompany so that you can learn mindfulness very quickly. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about how mindfulness changes the brain. And I'm not going to go into depth, but you've probably heard of the expression of exposure therapy. And basically what exposure therapy does is it allows you to be in the moment with something that is very painful and scary. And through exposure, that feeling of fear dissipates, because the part of your brain that's reacting to the fear doesn't hold on to the fear if you expose yourself long enough. However, there are quite a few caveats to that, but let's just keep it at the simple level now, and then I'll explain in later videos why this doesn't always work. But in general, it will work if you know how to do it correctly, and that's what I'm going to teach you through these series. What happens is, through mindfulness, by being present in the moment in yourself, and when bad thoughts and feelings come up inside of you, you just don't respond to them in the normal way of getting all upset and reacting. You're just saying, I see you and I accept you. And this, it seems like a cop-out to begin with, this whole idea of acceptance. But it's not the kind of acceptance where you say, this is okay and I want it to be this way forever. It's the strategic type of acceptance where you know that when you just accept it, eventually the part of your brain that's reacting with fear or pain is going to let it go. And that letting go is not something you can do consciously, because your fear response is basically outside of your conscious control. You're going to get scared if you meet a bear in the woods, or if you're being attacked by a lion, or if a polar bear is trying to eat you. These are scary animals. And if you're walking down a dark street and someone tries to mug you, you're going to have a natural reaction of becoming fearful. But mindfulness actually is able to change the brain so that you do not react with fear. Now, the interesting thing is that anything that causes pain, whether it's physical pain or mental pain, like a bad breakup or being stuck on an airplane seat that you didn't really want to be stuck in, that pain will be a self-fulfilling feedback loop. In other words, it will continue to make things worse, and you cannot let it go. Just say, no, I'm going to let it go. It doesn't work that way. You can distract yourself, but if that distraction doesn't get to the root cause, you're just going to continue being stuck. And you might have the right words, and you might try to act the same way, but there is no real underlying change. And that's what I really want for you. I want you to be able to come out of this and feel more whole, stronger, and more in touch with who you are and what's really important for you in your life. And the only way to do that, as far as I know, is through some sort of meditation practice. And any meditation practice that has the elements of accepting and just being in the moment is probably going to work. However, I'm going to advocate for a mindfulness type of meditation. But in my youth, I used to do a lot of Kundalini yoga, and that really had a very profound effect on me. I'll probably talk a little bit about that in another video. So the whole thing is, though, that through meditation, this helps you build the underlying neurology that supports the new narrative. They go hand in hand, right? And that's why it's so important to understand how to change your neurology so that in the end you're able to get out of being in this stuck state of victimhood. And my goal for you is to go from victim to mastery and to be the master of your own life and of your own destiny. If you really think that's important for you, that you want to be the master of your own life and your own destiny, then keep watching and hit that like button. Okay? I'll see you later. Bye for now.